You've been at it for months. You've worked through Genki, you've memorized hundreds of vocabulary words, you've reviewed particle rules, verb conjugations, sentence structures. By every measure, you've been studying hard. Then you open chapter 1 of Full Metal Alchemist, the manga that made you want to learn Japanese in the first place. And on page 7, a religious broadcast comes on the radio. Inori shinji o sareba sukuwaren. Taiyo no kami reito wa nanjira no ashimoto o terasu. You're less than 10 pages in and you're face to face with classical Japanese. Nanjira, thou, shinjio, an imperative form that died 3 centuries ago. Sareba, if so, hello Edo period. Sukuwaren, shall be saved, with an archaic volitional n. None of this is in Genki. None of this is in any beginner resource. But it's on page 7 of one of the most popular manga ever written. This is the moment you realize studying Japanese and reading Japanese are 2 completely different things. The recipe is not the dish. Gordon Ramsay became famous for his Beef Wellington. It's the dish that defined him, the centerpiece of Hell's Kitchen, the signature order at Restaurant Gordon Ramsay, the recipe that contestants on his shows live and die by. He's published it in his cookbooks. He's demonstrated on Masterclass. You can find the full recipe on his website right now, step by step. Sear the tenderloin on all sides, brush with Dijon mustard, layer the prosciutto over the duxelles, wrap tightly in cling film, chill, encase in puff pastry, egg wash, score, bake at 425 for 20 minutes. You can read that recipe 100 times. You can memorize every step. You can watch Ramsay make it on Masterclass until you can recite the instructions from memory. But you haven't made Beef Wellington. You don't know what a properly seared tenderloin looks like, not from the recipe's description, only from standing over a screaming hot pan watching the crust form. You don't know how tight is when you're wrapping in cling film. You don't know what duxelles that are cooked until dry actually feel like under a spoon, when to stop, when you've gone too far. You don't know any of this because a recipe is a model of reality, and a model is, by definition, a simplification. It has to be. If the recipe included every variable that actually matters, the fat content of your specific tenderloin, how your oven distributes heat, the humidity in your kitchen, the exact moment the Maillard reaction hits its peak flavor on the sear, it would be as complex as reality itself, and you'd never get started. So the recipe simplifies. It gives you enough to get a foothold, enough to not be completely lost in the kitchen. That's what recipes are for. That's what textbooks are for. Your grammar textbook taught you wa marks the topic and ga marks the subject. Clean, simple, a rule you can memorize. Then you open Full Metal Alchemist and hit Ore ni tocha antra no kata ga nanda korea nanda ga. And suddenly ni tocha, contraction of tote wa, no hoga, nanda ga, are stacked in ways your textbook never prepared you for. 4 particles in 1 sentence, none of them behaving the way the rules said they would. The recipe didn't prepare you for this. It couldn't. That's not a failure of the recipe, it's the nature of recipes. They're a starting point, not a destination. Following the recipe. The first time you make Beef Wellington, you follow the recipe to the letter, step by step, holding the page in one hand and the knife in the other. And immediately things happen that the recipe didn't mention. The tenderloin sticks to the pan because you didn't get it hot enough. The mushrooms are releasing liquid 10 minutes in and you're not sure if that's normal. The prosciutto tears when you try to layer it. The cling film bunches up. You're sweating, second guessing every step, checking the recipe every 30 seconds. The result? Maybe edible, probably ugly, definitely not what Ramsay's look like. But you made it. You went from reading about Beef Wellington to making one. And in the process, in the panic and the mess and the imperfect result, you learned things that no recipe could teach you. What a proper sear sounds like, how duxelles feel when they're actually dry, what happens when you don't wrap the cling film tightly enough. This is what happens the first time you read real Japanese too. You open up Full Metal Alchemist and Ed yells, "Oretachi no doko ga daido geinin ni mireru tenda yo." You know pieces, you know oretachi and maybe mieru, but doko ga? Your textbook taught you ga marks the subject, and that's true. But here ga turns a question into a challenge. Ed isn't asking politely. Doko ga means what part of us could you possibly think looks like street performers? and ni marks what he's being compared to. The particles aren't just grammar, they're loaded with Ed's frustration and disbelief. The textbook gave you the rules. Real Japanese shows you what the rules actually do when a character is angry, sarcastic, desperate, or heartbroken. That's the gap between the recipe and the dish. Breaking free from the recipe. Gordon Ramsay has made thousands of beef Wellingtons. He doesn't use the recipe anymore. He doesn't measure the mustard, he doesn't time the sear, he listens to it, watches the color, feels the resistance when he presses the meat. He knows the duxelles are done not by a timer, but by texture, by the sound the pan makes when the moisture is gone. The recipe hasn't disappeared, it's still there, a reference he can go back to if he wants. But he's no longer bound by it. He's internalized the principles underneath the rules. He understands why the recipe says what it says, which means he knows when to follow it and when to deviate. More mustard on this cut because the fat content is higher. A shorter sear because this tenderloin is thinner. A different mushroom blend because he wants a deeper umami flavor. As Ramsay himself puts it, a recipe is a guideline. Adding, subtracting, evolving it, that is part of the pleasure. That evolution, from following rules to understanding principles to improvising freely, is the difference between someone who cooks from recipes and someone who can actually cook. This is what happens with Japanese after you've read enough. After enough pages of Fullmetal Alchemist, you don't parse nanda korea as nanda kore wa, you just hear it the way a native speaker hears what do you mean. You recognize suge as the sound of a kid losing his mind over something cool. You feel the weight of te tamaruga as defiance before you can name the grammar pattern. You've broken free from the recipe. The grammar rules are still there if you need them. You can go back and look up a conjugation or check a particle usage the way a chef might glance at a recipe to confirm a ratio. But you're not cooking from the recipe anymore. You're cooking from experience, from feel, from thousands of sentences that have wired your brain to understand Japanese the way it's actually used. The gap nobody talks about. Here's the part that trips people up. The transition from recipe following to recipe free is messy, frustrating, and slow. And there's no shortcut through it. You're going to read sentences you can't parse. You'll hit something like konna hazu ja. It trails off mid-sentence. There's no verb, no ending, just konna hazu ja and silence. Your textbook would mark it as incomplete, but any Japanese reader feels the weight of what's not said. It wasn't supposed to be like this. The omission is the meaning. No textbook can teach you that, only reading can. You'll hit sentences where even after you look up every word, the whole thing makes no sense. Antara no sono bashi nogi ni tsukawarecha kochi mo tamatta mon ja ne. You know, antara means you guys. You can guess tsukawarecha has something to do with being used. But used how? By whom? And why does cha feel like a warning? Then tamatta mon ja ne, is that tamaru, to accumulate? It's not. It's an idiom. Unbearable. And kochimo, this side also, is somehow referring to a person. Every word in this sentence requires you to infer something the dictionary won't tell you. That's the gap between studying and reading. And the only way to close it is to keep reading, to keep making beef Wellingtons until the recipe becomes unnecessary. The bridge. So how do you get from studying to reading? You learn the basics as fast as you can. Hiragana, katakana, foundational grammar, core vocabulary. Every chef learns their knife cuts, bruinoise, julienne, chiffonade, and their 5 mother sauces before they're allowed to get near a real kitchen. You need them. Get them. But the moment you have enough to start following a recipe, the moment you can look at a real Japanese sentence and have even a rough idea of what's happening, that's when you start cooking. Open Fullmetal Alchemist, read a page. You'll struggle. You'll look things up. You'll misunderstand things. That's your first ugly beef Wellington. Soggy pastry, loose layers, overcooked center. It's supposed to be ugly. Grammar references don't go away. They become what recipes should be, something you consult when you hit a specific problem, then put back on the shelf. You see sukuwaren on page 7 and you don't know what the n is doing, so you look it up, learn its an archaic volitional form, and file it away. Then you get back to reading. The skill isn't built by reading about Japanese. It isn't built by memorizing rules or grinding flashcards. The skill is built by reading Japanese, sentence by sentence, page by page, mistake by mistake. Every sentence is a rep. Every rep builds the intuition that no textbook can give you. Gordon Ramsay didn't become a great chef by reading recipes. He became a great chef by cooking thousands of meals, failing constantly, learning from every failure, and eventually internalizing the principles so deeply that the recipes became unnecessary. You read the recipe long enough, your kitchen is ready, the ingredients are out. Stop studying, start cooking.